Law enforcement and government agencies struggle with parking citations, often because no one will pay them. Boots or other devices are costly, and they invite confrontation when implied and later removed by enforcing employees. With Tire Tag, you can avoid many hurdles and ultimately promote public safety and revenue collection. To learn more, visit tiretag.com. Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. Hey, ladies and gents, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric, and today I'm joined by Sergeant Scott Savage. Scott, thanks so much for coming on the show.
No, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we're here to talk about training. We're here to talk about policing, your training company, and we're going to get into all that. But if you could please, just for the listeners, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you and how you came into policing.
Scott Savage, I retired after 24 years as a police officer in California, in Northern California. I was a sergeant at one agency, did 18 years there, and then lateraled to another nearby agency. It was closer to home, and did the last 6 years there as an officer. So started over, as an officer. Before that, I was a paramedic. Before that, I was an EMT. So since 19 years old, working in emergency services is all I've ever really known. As a cop, worked a variety of assignments, SWAT, negotiator, had a full-time assignment to a terrorism task force up in San Francisco. Kind of interesting. FTO, academy instructor, all that kind of good stuff. And then I've always been a trainer, always taught different training courses, even when I was a paramedic. And, in 2019, I launched my own law enforcement training company with just me in one class, a tactical decision-making course, sort of how to handle hot calls. And that, since 2019, this company has really expanded. And so now we have about 17 instructors, about that many training courses. We go all over the nation and get to train cops and things like decision-making, leadership, tactics, all that kind of stuff. So it's a blessing to be able to do this work and to help cops be professional, save lives, save their career, those types of things, because, you're still working. I think you'd agree this is probably the most complex job function that there is being a law enforcement officer. And every year it's getting more difficult with the restrictive laws, certainly in the state you work, of course, in the state that I live in currently and worked in.
West Coast,
and then really across the nation. So I think we're just trying to help cops be successful. There's a lot of problems with conventional police training, sort of the, check the box, death by PowerPoint stuff that's out there. And we're trying to do something about that.
Yeah, I love it. What a great crash course. I'm curious why the shift from paramedic EMT stuff to policing. Was that always an interest and you got in when you're younger, or was that a potential full-time career when you started down that initial path?
I loved being a paramedic. I loved everything about being a paramedic. I was a paramedic in San Jose, California, which is a very busy EMS system. Lots of high acuity medical calls and trauma calls and just sort of anything you could have wanted to do as a paramedic. And when I started, it was me and a paramedic partner rolling around in an ambulance. Fire department would be on scene providing BLS, and then they'd hand it over to us and we got to do the cool paramedic stuff. But gosh, a few years into that, the fire departments started taking over paramedics, and they wanted to be paramedics too because they had to justify why they had so many firemen, because nothing's burning, right? So they became paramedics. They're like, well, we can get there quicker. Okay, in theory, okay. The issue, though, is that they would run 1/10 of the calls we were running, in an individual station. And so they really weren't getting the experience. So I distinctly remember arriving on scene and watching fireman paramedic trying to play paramedic, right? Let's throw everything, let's use everything in the box and on this kind of thing.
Yeah.
On this call. And I didn't want to sit around and watch anyone else do the work. I wanted to do the work. And so I got frustrated and I was like, what's a career that is similar, that is physically challenging, mentally challenging, noble, is working outside, is exciting? What is a career that could do that? Because as a paramedic, even as a young man, it's like you get to save people's lives. It's life and death. It's pretty rad. And so I chose being a police officer. And my grandfather was a police officer. He was a police detective in Amarillo, Texas, who unfortunately was killed in the line of duty in 1945. He was murdered. And so I had to approach my dad and ask him, listen, your father was killed doing this job, and I'd like to maybe do this job. And how do you
Mm.
feel about that? And that was an interesting conversation. But I became a cop in Northern California back when the cops were the good guys, when the community supported the police, when there was consequences for criminal activity. I know this all sounds really strange, but I promise there was a time
Looks like a
we did that.
dystopian past
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
future,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. We would chase bad guys and they would go to prison for crime. I know it's a weird concept, but I, loved it, and it was a great transition. And in many ways, being a paramedic prepared me to be a police officer
Yeah.
because I was used to trying to stay calm in the middle of chaos. I was used to going to emergencies. I was used to being a clinician, which was the greatest asset. I was used to going on calls, trying to make sense of what was occurring, applying a pre-described or pre-learned methodology or a protocol, applying that to whatever was going on, seeing if it worked. No, that didn't work. Let's try this.
Mm.
And so that sort of clinician thing
Yeah.
that Bill Lewinsky from Force Science talks about all the time, you'll see him say, we got to make cops clinicians. And I'm not sure most cops understand what he means by that. He means assess what's going on, apply something you've learned in the past to what's going on, see if it worked. And if it did work, continue. If it didn't work, try something new. But we don't teach cops to do that. We teach cops in techniques. Here's the technique on how to use your baton. Here's the technique on how to drive your car. Here's the techniques. We never taught them, how do you put it all together?
Mm.
When you're a paramedic or an EMT, you learn those techniques, but you learn how to assess the patient, right? And then then you decide what technique, if any, we should use. Sometimes it's, let's not do a thing. Don't do anything. Or we can't solve this with our limited medication list.
Sure.
So it was great. It was great. And I really enjoyed moving from paramedic to police officer.
Nice. Yeah, you said a lot of things there. First off, I want to pay a nod to our, brothers and sisters in red or on the fire EMS side, because I have seen a handful of times people make the swap one direction or the other. And oftentimes if you're successful in one, you're successful in the other. And I think it speaks to a lot of the things you just outlined, right? The response to stress, the ability to assess and draw upon all this intelligence and put it into action, right? And what you said makes me think about, I think the key, I would say maybe the most important trait when people ask that I've leaned toward as my career continues is adaptability, right? Like there's all these different skills and techniques you can have, but really the ability to continue to pivot. And you could even look at it in a more zoomed out version of what were the police expected to do when you started versus when you ended, and you were able to navigate all that because you continued to adapt. And even speaking to wellness and resilience, I mean, so many people, they adapt, but begrudgingly, and they really have a hard time with it. Whereas just being able to stay a bit more nimble and stay curious, I know that's a big thing for you, and we'll get there too, but continue to learn, right, and develop, and that you're going to be able to navigate all these stressors in the career a whole lot better if you're able to do that.
Yeah, that's true. And adaptability and flexibility and being nimble and agile, both physically and then psychologically, will serve you in any career you choose.
Yeah.
And especially in being a police officer, because things do change. I mean, if we just think about like the most monumental use of force law that's ever come into the United States is Graham v. Connor. And Graham v. Connor set out, what it makes something reasonable in terms of force, the severity of the crime, the level of resistance, the immediacy of the threat, and on and on and on. However, once police officers learn that, they go, cool, I understand Graham. But my question is that a static standard or is it a changing standard?
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
other words, what was reasonable in 1989 or whenever Graham v. Connor came out, is that what is reasonable in 2025?
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
Yeah, I would
Maybe
say
not.
not
And
with
so,
technology and awareness and training and
yeah.
all these things, right?
I mean, how many different iPhones have you owned? Like, I can't even count, and I just got an email. Your phone's ready for replacement. It's like, is there anything? Okay, great. What new thing is in there? Are we evolving even as quick as our iPhones are, in this industry? This industry is plagued almost by legacy. It's plagued by tradition. And some traditions are great,
Yes.
the way maybe our uniform looks, or the way, man, I can't really think of a lot of them because I don't even agree with myself. The way our uniform was, this World War I wool
Yeah, there's
thing
still
that you
some
can't move.
agencies
I mean,
in
is
that,
that
like,
what we should be wearing because it looked a certain way? I don't even think so.
right, like function and like with the purpose, right? And like, I mean, we're still in this space and time when Jumpsuits may not be widely accepted in all agencies and external carriers, even though there's a physiological benefit and a wear and tear benefit. And then, I mean, shoot, if we want to talk about like like getting your buddy out of a bad situation, like I'd prefer someone grab my external carrier than try to flop around with me and not have, like it becomes a handle in some ways. And sometimes there's built in handles, and there's a lot of function and reason why we may be moving and adapting to these things. But yeah, I think the maybe a toggle point is it tradition for the sake of tradition, or is it rooted in some sort of practicality and some real reason? And I think that's the classic nails on a chalkboard for a lot of people that are hungry, trying to develop themselves or a team or an industry to say, hey, why do we do this, boss? Usually, and if the boss says, well, that's the way we've always done it, that's the nails on the chalkboard for so many of us.
Amen.
It's cool if we
That's the
know
way
why,
we've
right?
always
It's cool
done
if we
it. It's
know
just
why.
such a cop out. It's such a
Like,
that's the way we've always done.
pun
Okay,
intended.
well, was there a good reason when it was invented? Like one thing I think of is response times. I'm sure your agency somewhere in some policy, some document, there is expected response times for priority 1, 2, and 3 types of calls, right? Most
Mhm.
agencies have something like that. We're going to get to priority 1 calls within 4 minutes. We're going to get to priority 2, and on and on and on. And you will, there'll be some lieutenant somewhere who is looking at the statistics and then at the meeting, hey, our response times are low. Oh, we got to get this, we got to get that. My question is, if we can't make response times, why don't we just change the response time?
Mm.
Let's change it today. Erase what it says and let's put a new one.
Yeah.
Because me doing that is just as arbitrary as however it was invented in 1982 when some lieutenant came up with, these are our response times. You can't tell me he went out and measured the distances between he took all the call data and he measured it and speed analysis and all this stuff and actually figured out scientifically what those times should be based on our staffing at this time. BS. It was a wild guess that I'm picking on lieutenants. I'll say,
Yeah, they're the
captain
worst.
came up with.
Basically my same
So
rank.
but why don't we just change it? Because me changing it today is as arbitrary as the day it was made.
Yeah.
So it's
Luckily,
like some
we
of the
don't
stuff
have.
I totally
Yeah.
agree with you. It's like, and they get so wrapped around the axle on this stuff. We got to make our response times. Why? Do we have to make the response times? And like you alluded to, if you suggest some of this stuff, that could ruffle some feathers.
Sure.
Well, I don't know. Eric's not a team player. Eric's trying to rock the boat. No, Eric's asking a question. Why are we doing this? Now, if there's a good reason, great. Now, and I'm not saying let's take 15 minutes to get to the code 3 cover emergency call.
Yeah.
No, I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying, why are we doing half of the stuff we're doing?
Yeah. I'm glad we don't have these arbitrary, I suppose, numbers. And so for an example, if people they're wondering if they have it, or maybe they're like, hey, I'm going to ask the boss if we have these things. We are tracking it, and we're trying to decide as a command staff, like, how do we use that information? Like, it's a very new thing for us. And it might be a really old thing for others. Like response time, sure, but I suppose with emerging technology, what do we do with that information? And of course, mindfully, a lot of officers are like, shoot, are you tracking? I was like, well, not per se, but we want to see a trend, right? We want to see if this data can help us inform something to that point, right? So information is just information, but what are we going to do with it is kind of what my takeaway is from your example here.
Yeah, and sometimes I remember a conversation when I was a young officer that some supervisor had when they were trying to improve response times. And they announced to some of my fellow patrol officers and me, well, gee, even if you get close to the call, can you hit your on scene button? Because that'll help us.
Wow.
And it's like, what? We're supposed to be ethical, first of all. So
What
if
are
our
we
response times are whatever they are. But I wonder what the unintended message of things like response times are. Now, for you and I, we could be looking at it statistically, looking at, hey, are we deploying resources correctly and all that stuff? And there's nothing wrong with that. But for some young patrol officer goes, they want me to get to calls quicker. I got to get to calls quicker or I'll get in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So now are you driving unsafely? Worse yet, are you rushing into calls that you should not be rushing into? Maybe it would be better to park down the street, amass your forces, get some more information and go in together. Maybe we can press on scene or the on scene button when we're down the street. I'm on scene technically, but we're not going to go make immediate contact. These need to be nuanced for the young officers to understand. We're not telling you to rush into emergencies, and I'm not telling you to drive like a bat out of hell to every call so that you can get some response time award. We're using the response time information on our end. Don't you give it a second thought.
Yep. Yeah, that's a perfect example. I'm glad you went there because that's where my mind was going as well. It's like the unintended consequences, people become reckless, right? They're doing what everyone experienced and the bosses do not want, which is driving beyond their means, driving too fast. Yeah, you outlined a lot of clear examples where someone could very well recognize, okay, what's the purpose of being on scene? Hitting the button, or when we know, well, we know that the officer or officers are there on the call. They're not driving anymore, right? So just by virtue of that, like, hey, I'm down the block until my back gets here. Maybe you even air that. I mean, shoot, a lot of these in progress calls you should air where you're staged at so you can rally together. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, it's putting the cart before the horse, or even like losing the whole purpose of the thing. So I love that. We're jumping into it, but before we got on the recording, kind of wanted to ask you what are the three main things that you would really drive home for active cops and leaders and trainers from young to old, right? Like inexperienced to extremely experienced, like these things that we need to recognize as a culture. And you've broken some down. You've kind of scratched the surface on a couple. So yeah, let's start with the first one.
First one I would say for any working law enforcement officer, no matter where you work, is to play chess, not checkers. And by that I mean, a checkers way of playing police work is the suspect did this and now I'm going to do this. The guy did this and now I'm going to do that. It's a really like he does a move and then I react to it. He does a move and then I react to it. To the extent possible, because it's not always possible, but to the extent possible, play chess. Chess players think 3, 5, 7 moves in advance. In other words, yes, I'm doing something now, but I realize where I'll be a minute from now, 2 minutes from now, 5 minutes from now. Yes, I'm making a move now, but I'm taking into account the suspect's behavior, the suspect's choices. A lot of people talk about like de-escalation, for instance, as if I, as a police officer, can de-escalate someone. I don't think you can. I think the only person in that adversarial confrontation I could probably de-escalate is myself, honestly.
Sure.
I haven't developed a superhuman power to control others. I don't know how to make someone do something without using force on them that they didn't choose to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So playing chess involves understanding the suspect choices. In our sort of tactical training, we talk about a variety of votes or choices the suspect can make upon being confronted by the police: fight, flee, attack, hide, lie in wait, ambush, self-harm, and on and on and on. Does your tactics account for that? Or will your tactic only work if he does the one I didn't mention, which is comply? A lot of tactics in police work, especially in the defensive tactics, arrest and control realm, only work if the guy complies. A lot of the complicated handcuffing techniques only really work if the guy goes, okay, I'll cooperate with that. But at that point, if the guy's going to cooperate, what does it matter what your tactics are? My wife could walk over and handcuff this guy. She's not a police officer.
Sure.
Honey, go handcuff that guy. He's going to comply. So what does it matter? Play chess, not checkers. Think strategically, think tactically. And thinking tactically doesn't matter if you're on SWAT or not. That's not what I'm discussing. I mean, be manipulative, be conniving, be sneaky, be thinking about, okay, where am I? Where's this guy going to be? How's this going to end up 3 moves from now? Don't just play checkers, which is they gave me a call. I drove to the call. I parked in front of the guy's house and I ran up to the door.
Yeah.
That's checkers. And now the door opens and I'll react to whatever he does. That to me is when you watch a lot of these police videos, I'm sure you watch the same ones I do. You're just like, wow, did we need to be there? I don't know. Did we need to be right there where you are? Or could you have been over there, down the street, across the street? Could you have gotten a few of your friends there and called this dude out to us? And if we're going to fight him, let's fight him on our terrain where we control the tempo, the terrain, we have cover, all that kind of stuff. Can we think a little bit more tactically, strategically about what's going on?
Yeah.
And I'm afraid that those types of decision making isn't really taught in most police academies, isn't necessarily taught in the FTO program. So I'm not sure where we're expecting police officers to learn to think like that. Sometimes officers have that mindset already, or they have previous occupations or perhaps military training where they think like that already. That's a dangerous thing to leave it to the personality of the officers. We should be formalizing that training so that everybody gets the benefit of that training and can think, okay, this crazy hot call comes out on the radio. What are we doing to put ourselves in the best position possible to be successful? Being successful would look like bad guy gets arrested, no cops were killed or injured in the There's a time and a place for the John Wayne kind of like, hey, all bets are off. We're going warp speed 10, and we're going to jump out, kick in the guy's door, and okay, Eric, you and me are this is going to suck, but here we go. There's a time for that. But I always think back to when I was a paramedic, we would roll out to the call, code 3, lights and sirens on every single call. When I was a paramedic, you could call and say, my finger hurts, and we're coming lights and sirens, as stupid as it sounds. But you know what? Our return to the hospital, once we had the patient, the times we went lights and siren with the actual patient to the hospital was probably 10% of the time.
Yeah.
Meaning it would come out as this crazy, acute emergency, and then we get there and it really wasn't. And the same thing holds true in police work. What we like to call emergencies aren't necessarily in extremis emergencies. They're urgent, perhaps, but sometimes it's that person's emergency, as cold and callous, admittedly, as that sounds. That's not my emergency. And I'm not saying let's be callous and ignore victims. Don't hear that. It's just that we don't need to jump into the fray of every single thing that comes over that radio. Mental illness, for instance, the person calls and their mentally ill family members in crisis. Perhaps he's armed himself. Is he committing a crime? Not necessarily, but he's acting bizarrely. A lot of cops will rush to that call because of the mention of a weapon and of the hypothetical harm that could occur to this family or the third party. And they'll rush in, and now a shooting has occurred. And the family immediately goes, I didn't want you to do that.
Yeah, why'd you do that? Yeah.
And the court goes,
I was in zero
you
danger.
didn't have to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. You hit on a lot of things, and I'm going to try to bounce around because there are a lot of points here, and they're absolutely intersecting and overlapping. You started with talking about de-escalation, and, we're going to circle back to that one with the example you just gave. And so the notion that I think this is a very healthy notion we probably don't really conceptualize or verbalize a whole lot, but yeah, we want to de-escalate someone. It's probably more accurate that we want to have actions and words and strategies to help promote their de-escalation, right? But you're right. Like, we all have a choice. And if I'm elevated, Scott, you saying, hey, Eric, calm down. That might actually do, a couple different things, but it's not your choice whether I calm down. It's mine. However, you say, hey, Eric, hey, I'm here, man. I'm going to take a step back this way. I'm not trying to hurt you. You're not in trouble. That might make, with a certain tone, that might make me feel safer and more enabled to, calm down, right? And so I like that you make that clarification, right, for people, because I think that we do kind of colloquialize or say that too readily. It makes me think, everything that you put out makes me think of what is the goal here. And so when you talk about all these different things, and whether it's rushing in too fast, or if this, I'm going to see what presents and then I'll make a decision. But we're not being clever, right? We're not looking big picture. It makes me think of, what is the goal here? And when we have successful officers, they are adaptable. They are good problem solvers. They are thinking rapidly of all these different contingencies. So not just like the door opens, if the suspect's there, I guess I'll do this. And if they're not there, I guess I'll do this, but I'll face it when I face it. No, like, you're thinking many steps ahead. You're thinking, here are all my smattering of options. If the suspect does this, I have a couple options here and there. My buddy has a couple options here or there. That might be verbal, that might be literal, physical. But at the same time, it makes me think of, when I propose, like, why are we here? What are we trying to get accomplished? Like, what's our lawful authority? Like, what is the legal reason we're here? Which ties right back into that last example too, right? Like, someone has a knife, they're kind of out of sorts, but what do we have? And oftentimes, a little bit more time, we can find that out pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's huge. And so for your listeners that are law enforcement officers, using the example of a person's in their own home, maybe it's a family member and they've got a knife and they're suicidal or acting bizarrely, and the family calls, right? All of us, of course, empathize with that, and we wish that there was a solution to that problem. But is the police the best medicine for that problem? Given the fact that if you just look down at your belt, you will see it's full of nothing other than weapons. So is having you enter this problem the best medicine? Maybe not. But then what do? Not go? Is that the best solution? Maybe not. One just kind of conceptual exercise or tangible takeaway for your law enforcement officer listeners would be to conduct something called a pre-mortem. We've all heard of a post-mortem. It's an investigation after death to figure out, why did the patient die? Post-mortem is great, but the problem is all the learning lessons happen after the patient's dead. And that's not that great. So if we conduct a pre-mortem, if we could do a pre-mortem to figure out how you were going to die, we could take steps to improve your diet or, whatever we needed to do. But in the tactical world, pre-mortem would be, imagine for me, let's come up with a call. It's this mentally ill guy in crisis in his own house. Now let's conduct a pre-mortem. I want you to decide that the worst possible outcome has occurred. we've responded and the worst possible outcome has occurred. Whatever that is to you, your mind might go to the officers were stabbed, the man stabbed his mom, whatever you want to say it. Okay, what are all the things that have to be in place for that to have occurred? Let's use the officers get stabbed. What are all the things that would have to be in place for that to be true if the officers were stabbed? We would have had to
be in close
respond.
proximity.
We would have to gone in the house, or he would have had to come out of the house, and we would have to be in the proximity to his weapon system, which is actually really close. And we were not impervious to it, meaning we weren't buttoned up in armor, or we weren't behind cover, or we didn't have the means to stop him. If he did exit the home and try to stab me, I didn't have the kinetic means to stop that assault. How could you have done it? Well, maybe a bunch of less lethal rounds fired right at him from a distance, or lethal cover if he got close to me. Okay. Now, with all those learning lessons, let's not do any of those things that you just said would have to be true for this to occur, right? Unless the juice is worth the squeeze. Use a different example. It's an active shooter at a school. A man has got into a school and he wants to shoot children. Let's do the pre-mortem. What's the worst thing that happened? The kids all get shot. Okay, what has to be true for that to occur? He has to have access to and you go down the list.
Mm-hmm.
How do we avoid that? We interrupt this by putting armed police officers between innocent people and him, and we bring the fight to him, and no active shooters ever survive that. He's never been able to continue his violent assault, statistically speaking, if we put cops aggressing the shooter.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yep.
Let's do that. A process like that just starts to illuminate what it is, but this thing about us using force on the mentally ill is a hot topic. Right? Especially in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. In the case versus Scott v. Smith, Drummond v. Anaheim, you go on and on. There's a million cases about us using force on the mentally ill. And over, the courts are telling us, the police, you have to balance the governmental interest in what you're trying to accomplish against the person's countervailing Fourth Amendment right to be left alone. Cops, you're trying to take them on a mental health hold? By the way, that's a civil thing, not a criminal thing. That's a low governmental interest.
Yeah, it's slippery, and a lot of cops see that. They see that paperwork, or they have maybe even an employee on that behalf, saying, a mental health worker saying, "Hey, I got a judge sign this. Like, let's go." And you can get really sucked into that. And I mean, maybe offhand, it's a California agency. Was it a sheriff that said, "Hey, we're not going to crisis calls"? That caused quite a stir, and I'm not making a commentary on it. I'm just highlighting the nature of this contention right now.
Yeah, Sacramento Sheriff Jim Cooper recently came out and said, we're no longer responding on certain suicidal calls. Certainly nothing that there's no potential for threat to others. It's a little bit nuanced, but what he said is we're going to refer a lot of that to a suicide hotline.
Sure.
Reason being, after recent case laws, which he cited Scott v. Smith, which is a Las Vegas case, he cites that as putting police officers in a position where they could use force on someone and that force would be deemed unreasonable. Doesn't make a lot of sense, because although cops signed up to do a dangerous job, no cop I know signed up to go to jail for doing it. And although we want to be of assistance to mentally ill in crisis, we may not be the best solution, and we may be making things worse. And there is a volume of cases that support that. Now, there's questions to be answered. What about the firefighters who want to go in and treat the guy and we can't secure the scene? What about the mental health team that says, well, we can't go in until you secure the scene? What do you tell the family? When do special relationships develop? What does the public duty doctrine say? I mean, there's so much nuance to this, but they weren't the first to do it here in California. Plumas County Sheriffs, which is a tiny rural county in California, did it years ago. And there's an LA Times article that articulates that, 5-10 years ago, they did the same thing, saying we're not responding on things that we believe could be a suicide by cop call. But this is the wave of the future. The future is going to be non-responses or limited responses by the police until there are vast legal protections for officers. Scott v. Smith didn't say you can't use force on someone who hasn't committed a crime and is only mentally ill. What it said there was body weight can be viewed as deadly force. And I don't know about you, Eric, but if you tell me even my own body weight can be deadly force, as was articulated in a previous case called Drummond v. Anaheim, which is why the officers lost qualified immunity, there had to be a previous case. If body weight can be deadly force, well, gosh, that almost sounds like almost anything could be deadly force.
Sure, yeah, because body weight can mean a lot of things, right? We're all very aware of a very career, society-changing situation with Floyd, right? So we're not just talking about that, but we're talking about how someone could put a knee on a shoulder, like a shoulder pin, and holding down someone that's actively resisting. that becomes really dicey for cops. That becomes very nerve wracking. So I appreciate you bringing up this whole conversation, because for active cops, they are very much aware of these, I suppose, these conversations and these conflicts of interest, right? For the newer people coming in, or that are applying, that are listening, to try to slow it down or break it down a little bit more. It's, yes, we want to help people in crisis, and we have a hand in that at times, but we might not be the best tool for the situation, right? So someone in very elevated, oftentimes we recognize as the police, and a lot of people that aren't police recognize this too. Sometimes we show up and it's like pouring gas on the fire. That's not our goal. That's not what we want. So maybe an example of a response is, guy is acting really weird. He's armed with himself with a knife. He's in the bedroom. He locked the door. A lot of officers and dispatchers will start trying to find out information and see if the family can exit the house, right? And so it is to inject for those that are not in the industry yet. We're not just saying, hey, we're not going to, like, we have nothing to do with it and good luck. But we do want to ask some questions and see if there are ways that we can make everyone else more safe. And then in most schools of thought, it would be, okay, if the person is in their room by themselves, can we get a line in? Can we get a negotiator? But the goal is not to rush in and push a confrontation, right? Because it is not a crime to harm yourself. And, we certainly don't want, and no one really wants us to harm them either, right? And so I'm just trying to spell it out for those that might be more, okay, like that might make a little bit more sense now that we're fleshing out that example.
Yeah. Yeah, this is why it's such a interesting career, right? So for people that are listening that are thinking about becoming a cop, yeah, do it. We need great people to be police officers in our society, and it's a very interesting career, and there's so much to learn. There's so much to learn. And so if you can come into this career, ready for that. Yeah, I want to learn all this. I want to learn these laws and tactics, and I want to, be clever, which is the word you use. I love that word. I want to be clever in the way
It sounds it's a little better than manipulative, but
Yeah,
it's the
yeah, I
same. Like, yeah,
agree. No, I
we want
agree.
to guide people's actions, and
Yeah, I
see
totally like that word
beyond.
better
Yeah,
than
yeah.
manipulative. It's like I want to respond in a clever way. The opposite of that is a dumb way, where
Mm,
I'm just going to park in front of the house, walk up to the house, knock, knock, knock. Oh God, he's got a gun. It's like, well, yeah,
mm-hmm.
anybody could have done that. We're hoping you call the cops. You've got some tactics. You're going to do some stuff that's going to manipulate or be clever about the situation, to where you create the conditions
Mm-hmm.
for when we do confront the guy. Eric's already got the family out of the house, and now we're confronting him, or we're putting a drone in.
Yeah,
Put a drone in the guy's house.
yeah.
What an amazing thing. Go buy whatever drone, throw that thing in the house, and go. Some of them you can communicate, right? There's a
Mhm.
speaker.
Yep.
And guess what? If he shoots the drone, good. We actually
Yep.
have a lot of
You
information we didn't
learned a
have a
lot.
second ago.
Yep.
A, that's a real gun. B, he has hostile intent. C, we need a new drone. D, like, we're
Let's
going to
back
ramp
up.
this
Let's
thing
get
up.
some armor, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, do with technology and drones, and I mean, there's no reason we should be knocking on this guy's door. Let's get him on the phone, or throw a speaker out in front of. I mean, there's some great, like, if you've ever seen this thing called a Brink ball. Brink is a company that makes, like, drones and stuff. BRINC. Brink ball. It's basically like a cell phone, a speaker cell phone that's on, that you just throw.
Oh, you just
I
chuck it
put it
like
on
a
a
like an old school
550
phone.
cord so
Yeah.
you can pull it back if he tries to grab it. But I don't know. Throw that in front of the house and be like, hey, man, it's the cops.
Yeah.
If he attacks the Brink ball, we'll
Yeah.
get a new one.
That's
You're better
that's
than attacking the officer.
This reminds me of, this was years ago. I think it was Police One, but I saw this article put out by someone kind of encouraging that you carry some tennis balls in your car. And I
Hmm.
never did this, but the notion was, sometimes, like, oftentimes your conflict is when you go up to the door, that fatal funnel, you knock, and then whether it's gunfire or whether it's the confrontation, the fight's on, whatever. But is the idea that you can peg that door with a couple tennis balls, essentially knocking, and see what response you get. There might be a time and place, and I told this story to someone else, a SWAT guy. He's like, "Oh yeah, SWAT
SWAT
rocks."
rock. Yeah.
Yeah, so oftentimes that's a breaching tool, but it's also like, hey, like, how do you
Yeah.
distract, or how do you get someone's attention?
Yeah.
These little pebbles. And do not blame me or Blue Grit if you start paying out for windows,
Yeah.
coppers out there. So, consult your local leadership and policies. But ways to think outside the box, because if we are to that level of thing, I know a lot of managers, supervisors, leaders will be like, okay, cool. You were worried about this, that, and the other. You had these emerging circumstances, and you broke a window with a rock. Yeah, I'm good with it. We'll pay for that window, right? So risk reward, all these things. But yeah, you outlined so many things in that first point of concepts over techniques, even to the point of, oh, if the guy's compliant or semi-compliant, right? And so I think about how I was trained in academy, which is very like, okay, straight wrist lock, wristy twisty. Okay, we're gonna try a bent arm bar. That didn't work, but there'd be like literally a lag and delay in the processing and in practice or on the street of like, oh, that didn't work. Oh, they're kind of angling up. I guess I got to do a figure four with the arm and then C step and do this. That's too clunky for the brain, right? You don't have the reps and all that. Whereas I love how in more recency, there's a lot more examples of it. And a lot of companies and uh, a lot of agencies are going more to this concept based approach where literally when I was like the temp training sergeant, a lot of the guys were putting that out with their new recruits. And I was like, oh my gosh, I got so much from this in addition to just doing a little bit of jujitsu at the time, but concepts, right? So even an instructor saying, hey, look at your musculature, look at your skeletal system when you're on all fours. How do we break down the structure? Where are the joints? Like, how do we move joints, like move the elbow and collapse this structure down? Or how do we wrap up the legs? So high low, like someone wrap up the arms, someone wrap up the legs, and then take them down to control them. Like that's super basic. Like you don't need to go to academy to understand that when you watch someone do it and then you practice it. Just literally wrap your arms around someone's legs right above the knee, and then they tend to destabilize and fall, right? So I'm painting these examples for those that might be unaware, again, rather than this technique versus that technique. Okay, now I need to try this. Meanwhile, the person's about to cold cock you with their other free hand because they're not compliant. So
Yeah. Yeah, if you're coming into this job or you're working, I suppose you would be well served to go start learning jujitsu, or some other fighting arts, Muay Thai, or some way of learning to fight. That would be great. And I don't know if that's a politically correct thing to say, but the reality is, as a police officer, you are going to get into fights with people. We can call it whatever you'd like. Your ears are sensitive and you'd like me to call it, we're going to defend ourselves against, a suspect aggressions, or we're going to use force on them. I'm happy to do that. But it's going to look a lot like the fights humans have been getting into since pre-biblical times. So you and an adversary or a few adversaries are going to roll around and try to overpower each other and strike each other. And that's going to happen. And so if you are, as a new police officer or thinking about becoming a police officer, if you could get your fitness, your nutrition, your body into shape, and you're flexible, you have good cardio, good strength, and then you learned how to fight, and in jiu-jitsu, learning maybe where my body is, where your body is, how my body works, how your body, those types of things, you would learn and be so much more effective than the conventional stuff that's being trained in conventional academies. I think a lot of academies are evolving now, so maybe this isn't as true as it used to be, but the twisty 25-step handcuffing procedure that you literally can't remember, that teaches recruits to go down a checkbox, that would be the equivalent to that block and silo, which is what it's called, block and silo, massed practice, all that stuff, the way we were all trained in the academy, is great for test a day because it makes it easier on the test evaluators to say Eric did or did not do step 3, 4,
they
5.
go down the checkbox, right?
Yeah, but it doesn't work on the street because it's taken the human dynamics out of it, right? And so if we could just teach you how to fight and how to move and how to roll and how to read the situation and be adaptable and all that good stuff, it's going to make it harder to test you. Admittedly, it's a lot more difficult to say you did or did not do well. I get that. And we need to figure out how we're going to standardize that across the state or the nation. But we have a lot of smart people in this country. We could, I'm sure, figure that out. But you're going to be so much more successful on the street because you're learning concepts, not techniques.
Yeah.
Yes, we need to teach you, a side mount escape. We do. And there's a technique for that. And we're going to teach that to you. And here it's on the wall. Here's your piece of paper that has it to study. But we're going to spend a little time teaching you these basic sort of things. And then we're going to say, okay, get that guy off of you. And he tries to, I can't get him off of me. Okay, well, now let's apply it, right?
Yeah.
The problem is in the police academies, we learn handcuffing, and then the next day you learn baton, and the next day you learn first aid, and then tomorrow it's de-escalation, and never these things shall meet. And on the street, we're asking you to, in this deeply rich, contextual, strange, confusing, ambiguous, dangerous atmosphere, to somehow make sense of it, right? It would be like teaching football players to catch a pass. And then next week, we'll teach you how to tackle. Next week, we'll teach you how to whatever. But we never actually had you play a scrimmage game.
Hmm.
where you had to figure out which one should I do.
Yeah.
You get to your first football game and you run the wrong way. What's Eric doing? Well, we never taught Eric how to play the game. We taught him how to run, which
Yeah.
he's running.
Yeah.
And you see this stuff on the street. That's why when the fight happens, a lot of cops are like, "Oh my god, what?" And
Yep.
they resort to caveman stuff because everybody remembers how to do that stuff.
Mhm.
The caveman. I'm just going to beat him on his face. That's deeply instinctual.
Mhm.
And then it looks horrible, and we go, "Oh my god, the cops are horrible." And then people go, "Well, he was trained. He was trained. We taught him the twisty techniques, and we taught him how to use this collapsible baton, and we taught him all these things, and he deviated from his training." And I always think, yeah, no, you didn't. He
Yeah.
wasn't trained. He attended a training. His name is on a roster. That's different than being, quote, trained.
Yeah, and
But
everyone
they
loses
check
out of
the
that
box.
equation, right? The officer is put in a bad spot because not adequately trained in an adaptable way to cement concepts and what to actually do, right? Another example is taser. Well, that didn't work. Let's try again. Let's try again. Let's try again. Drive stun, drive stun, drive. And then it's just like, ooh, like as any experienced cop, you're like, it's just cringy, right? Like you're like, this is worse and worse and worse. I mean, the community loses, the suspect loses, because ultimately, like, hey, we could just optimally control the suspect quickly with as the smallest amount of force possible, right? And then at the same time, like the agency loses too, because what good is it if you just have like the checkbox training? But there's a couple things I kind of want to circle back on that you said, and one is I don't feel the need to defend it beyond what you said. I think anyone that wants to find controversy and a political incorrectness certainly will with anything that we talk about. But yeah, it is to say violence is a part of the job. Neither of us are like, hey, we want to go bring the violence and be all that. Like, no, but we need to be prepared for the danger out there and protect people, sometimes from themselves. And we have to protect ourselves, right? And so that is to be trained adequately, physically, tactically, all these things. At the same time, I do like the example of, I would echo what you said as far as like people coming in. If you can get in the habits of doing some ground fighting or some sort of martial art, certainly, right? There's the skill base for one. But two, like one thing that I think we kind of glossed over was that if you have the abilities, you are going to keep your cool. You're going to keep your composure, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're on your back and you're not super stressed, that's a stressful place to be. But if you're on your back twice a week and you're like, I have a lot of options right now that don't include anything on my belt, then that's fantastic, right? You are thinking very clearly. And again, you can be effective in that nature. There's this gal that bought my hiring guide and she was, she's smaller. And so her first thing was, hey, aside from this hiring testing guide, what recommendations do you have for fitness? Like, should I get into CrossFit weightlifting? I was like, a lot of resistance training is great, but because you mentioned you're smaller, I would get into BJJ. I'm so proud. I'm so excited because she's like, she drank the Kool-Aid. She's full and she's like 2-3 times a week. And I'm like, okay, now don't hurt yourself. Like, think about the end goal. It's to,
Right.
not hurt yourself. It's to be serviceable and get hired and on and on. But yeah, I just wanted to mention a few things, kind of recapping a lot of what you just shared out. So we covered the first one being concepts over techniques. I'm gonna cheat because we brought it up in an interest of time. Your last one was slow down. You covered that as well, right? So don't rush in. And just to recap that one more time, there are a few times where it's go time, right? Active shooter, active threat, active violence to innocent people that cannot protect themselves. You will know those times. They're few and far between. That exigency where you got to boot the door. If you have to call your sarge and ask, then you don't have it. Hopefully you're on point there. And then let's go to the second one. So that is growth mindset, and that's probably like a fantastic way to kind of wrap the episode because I love this discussion. I think it's what we all need to take on more of to literally pivot away from any semblance of victim mindset. But yeah, why don't you take it away, Scott?
A growth mindset motivates, and a growth mindset is a secret weapon as a police officer or just a human. The minute you develop a growth mindset, which I would define as you think learning is fun, you think learning is cool, you think being a nerd is cool, whatever you want to describe it. Like if you have that kind of mindset where you're like, I enjoy learning something new, and I'll even do it if I fail at something. If there's a learning lesson to be had, I'm kind of all in. I don't mind looking a little silly, and I don't mind going, I'm sorry, hey, I don't know that. You said something and I don't know what that term is. Could you tell me what that is, please?
Mm-hmm.
If you are mature enough to feel that way and you're like, it's not a big deal, not everybody knows everything, it opens up all doors for you. And the advanced version of a growth mindset is if you learn how to learn. If you learn like this modern science of learning and how people actually learn, it's not how we think it is. You could read a great book called Make It Stick, The Science of Successful Learning by Brown, Rodinger, and I'm blanking on the third author's name. But Make It Stick art tells you about all the latest science and how humans learn. But anyway, if you know how to learn, you learn how to learn, then you're like, holy crap, I can almost learn anything. Now, I don't know that I could learn to be a pro basketball player. I don't know if I've got the vertical jump. Maybe I'm not physically, I don't have the makeup to do it, but I could learn how to be good at basketball. I could learn a second language. I could learn, how to play a musical instrument and all that stuff because I know actually how to learn. And I think it's cool and I think it's fun. And that is a great thing for a new police officer or a seasoned police officer.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can keep the curiosity, which is a term you use, if you can keep a curiosity about what is the latest science, what is the latest stuff, I don't know about BJJ. Why is everyone saying it's so cool? Maybe I should go check it out and be okay with like, hey, I'm new. I don't know anything.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a clear belt. I don't even have a white belt. I'm a no belt. And could you show me a few things? Can I just try it and find some reputable people that aren't going to destroy you
Mm-hmm.
and just be like, can I just learn? Like, what is this all about? And not be worried about, oh, I look a little silly. Oh, I don't know as much as the next guy. Can you sign up for some training classes and be like, I never really got training in this, even though I've been doing it for 25 years. I'd love to learn more about this. Man, that just opens up the world for you. And not everything you learn, you're going to agree with. Not everything you learn, you're going to be like, I'm going to start using it. You might be like, BJJ sucks. I'm going to go do Krav Maga. Great. Go learn about Krav Maga. I mean, this gives you more tools. And, I deal a lot in the use of force realm. And so I just think if you know the law about using force, you have a command over it because you're so curious. You just read cases and nerd out. Then you have the physical skills and you're like, I'm really not afraid of you. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I could destroy you right now, honestly. You just walk into calls like you're playing chess. You're like, dude, I'm already 7 moves ahead of you, bro. You look at people and you're like, dude, and he's like, come on, I'm going to fight. Dude, you're already in handcuffs. You just don't know it yet. In my mind, I've already played out the steps and how it's going to happen. Or I'm like, this is not worth it. I'm out of here. You just have this edge about you. And where does that come from? About getting curious, about being like, dude, I'm going to read some books. I'm going to listen to some podcasts. And what a incredible time we live in, dude.
Yeah.
I can look up anything on YouTube right now. You name it. I would like to learn Swahili. I got to learn Swahili right now. Pull up how to learn 10 phrases in Swahili. You instant access to it. So use all that. And if you're a cop, stop looking in our domain for training all the time. Dude, the police domain does not have it all figured out.
But
What
you're
can
the
I learn
second
from
person this week that said that. I love it.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, what can I learn from aviation? What happens when Chesley Sullenberger lost power to both engines over the Hudson? What did that checklist say? And is there any takeaways for law enforcement? What can I learn from nursing? What can I learn from medicine? Hey, sports psychologists, because I think you guys haven't figured out more than we do about X topic.
Yeah.
And once you get curious about that, no matter if you're new, an old cop, if you have a growth mindset, it'll motivate you to learn more. And then it's this vicious cycle where you're like, I got to buy more books, man. Books are cool. It'll help you be successful no matter what your career is.
I love it. I mean, no one is listening to my show that's not into a growth mindset, but I do like to nudge people and nudge myself and look in the mirror sometimes of what are the limitations that I am passively accepting, right? Or I am letting dominate my worldview or whatever. And a couple tools for that. And what I mean by that is, you talk about Swahili. A lot of us would be like, I could never learn from Swahili. So maybe after this conversation, you're like, okay, I could learn Swahili. I just don't want to. Cool. That's way better than I could never learn Swahili. Or if you're like, that sounds really interesting. Literally, as Scott said, you could learn 10 words or phrases today. And now you are actively learning Swahili. Like the flip there, right? It's not, I don't know it. I am learning it. And then I like to add yet to the end of a lot of things, right? So I don't know that yet, or I don't feel confident in that yet. And even to take it back to the control tactics and arrests, like just knowing you can and you have the abilities, that confidence is so prevailing. Like so many people through the years I've seen, like I know they can handle themselves. It doesn't matter how big or small they are. I know, and they know. And sometimes that the suspect knows too, right? The offender knows. And it's not the, be quiet or walk softly, carry a big stick. It's just like they're chill. They are de-escalated because they're like, I'm not worried. I know what needs to happen and what will happen how I will react to it, how I'll affect it. And that doesn't just come with you just wanting, right? There is a benefit to, act as if, like for newer people that need to inject some confidence in themselves, sure, that's something you can work on. But the best way to get confidence is to be competent. And so you do that through reps and through just throwing yourself in the ringer and accepting that perpetual student nature, which is something that you were just sharing about. And I think that so much that's impactful for the trainers, right? The leaders. Like, you want to know how people are going to learn because you're the ones hopefully trying to teach them.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, well said. A growth mindset is the opposite of a fixed mindset. And just because you don't know it today doesn't mean you can't learn it. And if you believe that humans are born with innate abilities and the rest of us aren't, there's a mountain of research that shows it's actually not true. And, with the proper mindset and the proper information and the proper teachers, it's almost unstoppable what you can do. And we need those kinds of people in law enforcement that are physically capable, but equally as smart, and they're great decision makers. And then you arrive on scene, you're like, okay, cool. What are we doing? I'm not intimidated by any of this. Let's do it. So,
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Scott. And please tell the listeners where they can find you and access more information about your training group.
SavageTrainingGroup.com is the best way to find all of our training. We've got online and in-person training. So SavageTrainingGroup.com has our training schedule, all the courses we have. We've got a variety of classes and things like decision-making tactics, the new science-based interviewing, field training officer, you name it. We got some great instructors that are teaching those classes. Got some cool in-person and online stuff. And then we're on LinkedIn and Instagram. Just ask anybody who's interested in training tips and strategies and kind of some of the stuff we were talking about to give us a follow over there.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.